Hey guys, welcome to SheKnowsArsenal. My name is Jessica and I'm your host, and you can follow me on Twitter at @it'sJustino. On today's headline show, we're going to be talking about Guendouzi. Apparently, he will be a Marseille player. Some new news has come out about that. We kind of talked about him this morning, or earlier today, but things have kind of changed a little bit, so we'll talk about that. We'll also talk about the alleged $20 million bid that's been rejected by Shakhtar for Manor Solomon. And we'll also talk about Emile Smith Rowe apparently being on the verge of signing a new deal that would keep him at the Emirates until 2026. So good news there, good news there. And then my special question at the end of the show, I'm actually going to give it to you guys early so that you can start thinking about it, because I think you might need a little bit of time to think about your answer. And I want to make sure that we give some good time to it because I think it's really interesting. But before we get started, just let me know how you guys are feeling in the chat box, where you're watching in from. I hope you guys are all having a good day, or your day was good if it is 10 p.m. UK time for you guys. And yeah, how are you guys feeling about, Guendouzi leaving, Emile Smith Rowe getting a new deal, and all that types of stuff? Let me know in the chat box. So let's see. Let's go ahead and get started with the first headline. So Manor Solomon is somebody that we've been linked with for a while now. The first time I think I heard his name was like around January. And I've seen reports that the profile of Manor Solomon is something that's really important to Edu and his recruitment team. They feel like we need somebody in this mold in this team. And from what I've seen from Solomon, he's a young player. I think he's about 21 years old and Israeli international. And he is a right winger, but plays very similarly to Eden Hazard in that way, where he's a true creator scorer type player. And he's not a chalk on boots right winger. He's very much in that mold where he can play more inside, and he's very tricky. He's 2-footed. And this is something that I've been looking at, and every single time his name is brought up, I'm thinking that there's something to it. It may not be as deep as, what this headline is saying, that we've put in $20 million euro bid for Manor Solomon that's been rejected. But this name keeps coming up, and the profile of player is very similar to that of Emi Buendia, creator scorer off of the right-hand side, right winger that can do more than just to chalk on boots, get to the byline and cross the ball in. It's somebody that has that Eden Hazard aspect to them, low to the ground, very tricky, skillful player. And this player, just like Emi Buendia, is 2-footed. So it's not somebody that needs to cut in on their left or cut in on their right. They're that all-around, well-rounded type of winger profile. And we had kind of spoken about this with the Emmy links, that it never really made sense to me that this was like a profile that, would make or break us. But I think it's something that we're looking at. There's a pattern for me between Emi Buendia, Manor Solomon, and the fact that Willian might be leaving. If we look at the way Willian has been used in the Arteta system, he's been used off of the left and the right-hand side, not as a true winger, but as somebody that's kind of coming in between the lines and playing almost like a second 10. That is in line with the Emi Buendia and Manor Solomon type links. But if Willian leaves, maybe we're looking to bring in somebody of that same profile, but for a certain price, right? Emi Buendia was somebody we looked at, but the deal didn't make sense. Manor Solomon is somebody that we're looking at, but what this headline really says is that they have turned down our supposed bid because they believe they can receive more money from interested parties. So I don't know how reliable this is, but the links say to me that there's a pattern of profile of player that we may be looking for to be on that right-hand side. So that really interests me. Because that's different than looking for a 10. That's looking for a different profile. And I like that profile. But $20 million euros for this player, as talented as I think he is, he's not the finished product. And if they look for 20, 25 million, 30 million, something like that, I'm thinking, yeah, just forget about it, because I can't see this player being worth that much. And it's just so typical, if they're looking, basically they want more money than that. It's probably because they feel like Arsenal have more money and they're just trying to squeeze it out of us. But this player has also been, vocal about wanting to come to London and wanting to come to Arsenal. So I think there may be something to this, maybe not to the level of like we've actually put in a bid, but to the level of maybe we're interested, he's interested in us, and we like the profile of player. So you guys can kind of let me know what you think about that while I just kind of pull up some of his stats and stuff like that. Yeah, he's 21 years old. He's small player, 5'6", and he has 9 goals in that league that they play in, the Ukrainian Premier League. 9 goals. I mean, that's a good amount, but like it's in that league, so you have to take that with a grain of salt. But I like the profile, to be honest. He can play off of the left-hand side or the right side, and that's important in the Arteta system, right? And the foot, like with his profile says he's both footed, he's 2-footed, which is important because we have so many players that rely so heavily on one foot, and this would make a difference. I like that. His current market value is 22 million. So I would think 20 million or maybe just a little bit above that would get that deal done. But I mean, if we're talking 30 million, 35 million, I think you could forget about it because, like I said, he's not the finished product. 9 goals, 1 assist. He doesn't start all the time, that kind of thing. So citizenship is interesting, Israeli and Portuguese. That's interesting. I didn't know that. Not like it makes a difference, but it seems like there's a link. Portuguese speakers, Brazilian. It seems like there's a link there. But yeah, you guys can let me know what you guys think about that in the chat box. Let's see. This is from GNA TV. Thank you so much for your super chat. I really appreciate it. Keep grinding. All love and support from Gem and ads. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate that. Chelsea fans in here. Interesting. Gunnar Glenn says, hey, Jess, I'm in Ireland. Thank you for watching. Gunnar King says, hey, Jess, hey, how are you? Love from London. Thank you. Pepe is going to AFCON, I think. Richard says, this Solomon rumor is nonsense. I mean, I think there's something to the fact that we're probably like the profile, like the player, but the level of how interested we're in terms of like, did we put in a bid? Maybe a little bit off. But I do like the profile of the player, to be honest. M says, Adu likes Portuguese speakers. I mean, it just looks like we like players that are from a certain region, or it's not out of the realm of possibility. I mean, Adu has something to do with Martinelli. He brought in Gabriel. He brought in Willian, Ruben Neves. Now this guy, he's Portuguese, a lot of like Portuguese and Israeli. So I wouldn't be surprised if there was some sort of link in that way. And that's what I kind of want, though. If he's a specialist in a certain area, I would like to get the best, players from that area if he can swing that, especially like untapped talent. So GNA says Shakhtar have offered solid players through the years. Exactly. And I think don't Shakhtar, those two teams, the Shakhtar teams, have a link with Brazil as well. They bring in Brazilian players, and maybe there's something to that. Maybe Adu has a link with these clubs. You never really know. But we've been linked with him multiple times, which just leads me to believe that there's a little bit of something there, maybe not as deep, but we'll see if anything comes to fruition. But there's something with the fact that he has a similar profile for me as Emi Buendia. They play kind of similarly in that creator scorer role. And maybe we are looking for somebody in that mold for that position to maybe replace Willian. You never really know. Akindele says we need to find more hidden gems, back to signing random League 1 and 2 players. Gunnar King says, yes, the Ukraine bring in a lot of players from Brazil. So, yeah. And Colin said, I have to say I don't like the Arteta system. The players we bring in need to be character leaders. I mean, we do need more leaders. But I think for me, with the leader conversation, I don't really I don't really want to bring in those types of players. I want the players that we have to show themselves to be leaders. My biggest fear is that we always kind of go out of our way to kind of bring in said leaders from other teams, and it never really works out that way. We have leaders in our team, they just happen to be young. Declan Rice is a leader and a captain of sorts for West Ham, and he's 21 years old. So I don't really understand why we can't give the reins to Tierney or somebody like that and just move on, because the players that we have, they may be young, but they will turn into leaders. Whereas like this idea that we need to like go out and find these people. I mean, if it's not Grealish, then I kind of don't want it. You know, we don't really need to be taking other people's trash and just being like, yeah, this is a leader or experienced leader. We don't need that. Dublin Gunnar says, didn't Willian play for Shakhtar? Uh-oh, yeah. And he was good for them, but that was like 1,000 years ago, right? Usopp says, why do we need to replace Willian? He did nothing to replace. I mean, so if you think about it, we have Emile Smith Rowe who's going to play in that 10 role. But if you look at our options for wingers type players that are going to play on that left and that right side, you have Saka and Pepe and Martinelli. You know, for me, Emile Smith Rowe is a 10, and I think he needs to play there next season. He can fill in on the left, but I prefer not to displace him because I think he's so good in that position in the 10 role. So we could use one more person to fill in for Willian. I mean, we're talking about, well, of course, we're not replacing much because it's not like he added anything, but to have another profile there, we don't actually have that profile on the left. Well, we have it kind of in Zaka, but not in Pepe or Martinelli. So maybe it's just a different option to have. And if we could bring it in for a, you know, not a difficult price, like not anything like too big, I don't see why it wouldn't be, you know, an option. Maybe they don't feel like Nelson can fill that role right now. GNA TV says, look at Fred, went from Shakhtar star to underrated media villain at United. If you bring in this guy in, use him properly. I mean, everybody that you bring in, yes, you have to bring in and they have to have a role and be brought in properly. But there's something about the link between Shakhtar and Brazil and the fact that Edu is looking at this player, you know, potentially. And I think there's something there. It may not be deep, but, you know, I think he's a good player, though, to be honest. I think he stands out. He's a good profile of player to have, you know. I know he's not what Arsenal fans are looking for. There's this thing going around that we need stars and this just isn't good enough. But this is what we used to do. This is what we say. Like, I'm sorry, if Leicester was looking at this player and brought him in, we would have a heart attack because Leicester gets all these gems and they're looking and all this kind of stuff. So let's not talk out of both sides of our mouths. Like, there's nothing wrong with bringing in Solomon, but also bringing in other higher profile players around him too. I like untapped talent. This is my jam. Like, if we brought in somebody like this and Arteta could coach him up, I'm perfectly fine with this. Rafi says Solomon looks class. Would be a shame if he was received in the stadium with the same hate and abuse he's receiving online at the moment. Is he receiving some abuse right now? I'm not aware of the abuse part, but he does look like a really good player. O'Malley said he didn't start all the time at Shakhtar. He's not good enough. I mean, I don't know. I think we make very, you know, hard decisions on players based on just a little bit of information. You're 21 years old. You know, you're not always going to start every single game. Maybe he's just being eased in. We don't really know what the deal is, but this is a player that he's worth 22 million at 21 years old. Like, that's not bad, you know? Usopp says we don't need stars, we need heart. Yeah, I kind of agree with that. AFC Pressure says, what's your opinion on Nabil Fekir? Are we linked with him again? Like, for real, for real? I mean, like the player, like the profile, think he kind of would give us that same vibe, but I mean, he was able to get through that season with Real Betis without relatively no injuries, which was my biggest fear about him, was that he was going to continue to be injury prone after the knee situation that stopped him from going to Liverpool. But gosh, he's old. You know, isn't he a little bit too old for us to be bringing in prime age player? You know, how much would it cost? You know, these types of things. I would rather us go after somebody like this, you know, that has some upside to him, whereas Fakir, he has like no upside anymore. We would be his last stop before the MLS or, somewhere else, So for me, it's a no. Colin Young says, absolutely, I believe we do not need stars. I'm talking quality players to blend with our youth. Yeah, for sure. Quality players, and quality means different things to different people. Like some people can only look at the price and decide that that's a quality player. For me, quality is not about how much they cost. It's about how well they fit in your system. Are they the right profile? You could look from Grealish back at Aston Villa and tell me those players, if they were linked with Arsenal and you'd never seen them play for Aston Villa, you wouldn't be jumping out of your seat, right? But when you see them play for Aston Villa, you're thinking they're better players than what they probably are on paper based on what transfer market says about them and, how many accolades they have and all that kind of stuff, what their name is. The value of a player is really more about how well they fit in your system. I even think this about Leeds players. A lot of people want Leeds players, and I'm like, would they fit in our system the way they fit in the Leeds system? They're valuable for Leeds because they're perfect for that system. For Arsenal, would they be that, would they be that good? I'm not sure, So for me, I know that people look at things based on how much do they cost, how much hype is around them, do other teams want them? But for me, it's about how well they fit in your system. And that is how quality kind of comes together for me. So if they fit, then they're quality, and if they fit and if they can perform, you know what I mean? Akindele says we need to find a feeder club in Europe like Wenger did. With Edu being from Brazil, we could hide players from South America, sorry, till they qualify for a visa. What? But I get what you're saying. Like, we don't actually have a feeder club. We don't have anybody that we can like pick really interesting talent off of. So I think we need something like that. And I'm actually surprised that we don't have a feeder club in America. I'm sorry, but like Manchester City is doing that. Other teams are doing that where they have even Bayern Munich, one of the best teams in the world, gets a lot of their young talent from the MLS, and people look down on it, but there's a lot of good young talent. We're not doing any of that. Maybe that's something that they're looking to do. Guendouzi will be at Marseille. So let's go ahead and Fakir is only 27. So maybe he's not old. So old is the wrong word. He's a prime age player that has very little upside. So after we have him for 2 years, what happens after that? If we want to move him on, we're not really going to be able to. It's going to be difficult. And I'm just wondering, could we not bring in somebody of a similar profile, younger, that has big upside? So in 2 years, if we wanted to sell him, we could sell them for double versus losing value on a player because they're a depreciating asset. You know what I mean? So it's not about old. Maybe I think old is the wrong word. So I shouldn't have used that word. I'm just saying like there's no upside to Fakir, and because we're not in Europe, we're not really, I don't think we need to be taking risks on players that we're not 100% sure can do the job. So M says, I like bringing in guys like Brandt who need a reclamation project, but is super talented. I mean, I think I said on the earlier stream, I rate Brandt very highly. And I do also like players that need to kind of like redeem themselves or need to reinvent themselves somewhere else. I think environment is very important for like players that are talented. And if they're not doing well, they need to go and find somewhere else to be and kind of reinvent themselves. And I think Brandt is in that place in his career because he's like 24, 25 now, still making the German national team. Very, very talented. I would take him at Arsenal tomorrow. Colin says, this Solomon kid, as you see, Saka, Martinelli, Pepe, even ESR are this molded player. We have holes to fill. I mean, this is not, I don't think this would be like a priority per se, but it's like that extra player that you bring in because everybody's talking about we need another attacker. This is what I'd be talking about. Once you get your center midfielders, you need 2 of those. You're going to need a right back. And then we start looking at other positions. This is a position that I would look at. because we don't really actually need a striker. And if we're not going to play with a 10, we would need a different profile on the wings to take us to another level. And this would make sense to me. So that's pretty much it on that. So let's move on to the next headline. Guendouzi. So this is interesting. Let me translate it because, yeah. So Guendouzi, essentially, it's not, so yes, Arsenal will activate the contract extension. So we will activate another year on his contract to extend it. And there's no agreement right now between Arsenal and Marseille at the stage, but it looks like it's going to happen. And essentially what will happen is there will be a obligation to buy for 10 million euros. So that is the word on that. So we know we're going to extend it. We know that it has to be an obligation to buy. And for me, for Arsenal, it has to be like, we have to start making sure we're securing the funds, so an obligation to buy makes sense for me. And it seems like it's going to get done, but he will be a Marseille player because he'll go on loan to Marseille first, and then they will buy him with an obligation for 10 million. So I think there's positives to this and there's negatives to this, right? Because we're not really going to be making the amount of money that I feel like we should be for Guendouzi, for a player of his age. We'll be getting somebody away from the club that's ultimately right now being seen as more of like a negative. We don't want people that don't want to be at Arsenal, maybe a negative influence, don't get along with the manager types. We want to move them away from the club and start anew and start off fresh. But getting 10 million euros for Guendouzi when we bought him for 8, when at some point in the last 2 years he was worth maybe 40, is something that the club needs to look at. It's something that the club needs to identify as an area of improvement. Young players that come through Arsenal, we need to figure out a way to, even if they're not working out, even if they have attitude issues, even if they're not the perfect fit, even if they're damaged goods, to ensure that the value destruction of these players does not happen. We have players coming down the pipeline that we have very big plans for, whether that's in terms of playing for Arsenal or becoming some sort of player that we can recoup a fee for, that this cannot happen with. And I'm looking at players like Martinelli and Saliba in particular that are kind of in that weird space now where it's like, I don't think Arsenal fans are convinced that Arteta has a plan for them. And whether he has a plan for them or not in the first team for Arsenal, he cannot destroy the value of these young players. He cannot. It won't work. It'll be a huge, huge red flag. And players are not perfect. They're not perfect. Like most, you know what I'm saying? Like, you're going to have to work through different types of personalities and players that are coming from different walks of life and have different ideas about how their career should go. So this is where man management comes in. It's easy to manage players like Bukayo Saka. Do what they're told. Nice, polite, come from a family that is supportive, just straightforward. But then you have players with rough edges like Guendouzi, players that maybe feel like they should be playing right now, even at a young age, like Saliba, players that don't fit perfectly into your system, like Martinelli. He has to learn how to work with these players, not for just the sake of the first team and them getting playing time, but because you're going to destroy their value if it becomes obvious and they start to agitate. He has to figure out a way to work with these assets. Like, getting 10 million for Guendouzi is right now probably all we can do and the best outcome for the situation that we're in right now. But him being worth what he was worth just a couple of years ago to get to this point, I can't overlook it as just, well, Guendouzi had a bad attitude. There's so many players that don't have perfect attitudes. I have a hard time believing that they're not that. They're just not that. So it's a combination of, for me, Guendouzi just not being a good fit for Arsenal Football Club, but Arteta not really understanding how to deal with these players. He's having a difficult time. And that's you're not at Manchester City. You can't just ice out certain players and just expect to regen and get more money and replace them. You're going to have to figure it out, because at Arsenal, we are a self-sustaining model. You know, if we don't recoup fees for these players, this is when we get into situations where we can't get the players in that you actually want. So it's kind of like he has to make a concession or something, or just learn how to work with these players so that their value does not drop. Saliba's somebody that if you wanted to sell him this summer, you could probably get what you paid for him, because he's had such a good season. If you bring him to Arsenal, you don't treat him right, and then he's ready to leave in January, then we start to look at value destruction. And so that is a big issue for me. Guendouzi leaving at this point, I'm happy. He kind of needs to go. Hopefully, things work out for him wherever, at Marseille. But from an Arsenal perspective, this is not good. It's not great. It's really not great. You bought him for 8. He's a 21-year-old and you couldn't double the value. Like, it's crazy. What do you guys think? Let's see. Rhino Boy says Guendouzi for 10 million is so low. I mean, it is. It is low. And I can't I can't I can't separate that from Arteta. I really, really can't, because I know players are going to have bad attitudes, but it's up to the manager to kind of fix it. And if you guys don't follow Tim Stillman and Elliot, Yankee Gunner from the Arsenal Vision podcast, you should. They have a thread that they just kind of talked about it in a thread on Twitter about how Arsene Wenger had to deal with players with rough edges, players that were seen as damaged goods like Bergkamp and Vieira, and he had to work with these players. Van Persie, also somebody who was said to have a bad attitude, he worked with these players and made sure that it didn't get to this point. And that's something that Arteta has to learn. It's not just about working with the ones that are perfect. You're not going to have perfect players like Saka all the time. Let's see. Gunnar Glenn says Arteta wants him gone, so while he is here, Guendouzi won't play for us. Usopp says, I like Guendouzi's fight and attitude on the pitch. If he could have just gotten his head together off of the field. Exactly. Jason says, Teds, this is his undoing. It's something that I'm hoping that as he progresses as a manager, he looks back and says, I made a mistake, or there's a different way I could have handled this. But the whole thing with Dubai, shutting him out, icing him out, a lot of it just seems so over the top for a 21-year-old who I just feel like a different manager would have been able to corral him just a little bit more. He had issues everywhere he's gone, but never to the level and never to the way it spiraled and caught fire the way it did at Arsenal. And I think some of that had to do with Arteta's clumsiness with the situation and his inexperience dealing with players like this. Let's see. Jason said, imagine Willian 22 million and a $2 million profit or net neutral on Guendouzi. Don One says, Arsenal have always been undermined in the transfer market. Our fan base are so critical. By the time these players leave, they have no value left. I mean, do you guys believe that? I think about this all the time and I don't know if, it has to, the way that the fans berate the certain players and build up a negative narrative around them, can that hurt their transfer value? I mean, it could, I'm not sure if I can't say for sure, but we do talk about players so bad that I'm trying to figure out who would want them with the way that we're talking about them. You know what I mean? Waza said the problem is Guendouzi tanked his own value by doing nothing on loan. I think his value was tanked at Arsenal, and then it didn't go up because he didn't do anything at Hertha Berlin. I don't think his value was 40 and then he went to Hertha Berlin and it dipped. His value was destroyed from the moment that the Mopé thing happened. Actually, before that, when they were saying that he had a poor attitude when we played against Manchester City and we lost 3-0, then Brighton the next game, he strangles Mopé. They had already had the issues in Dubai. And then from that moment on, it just got worse and worse and worse. And then we were forced to loan him out to try to sustain the value that he had left after the value destruction had already been done by Arsenal in that part of time in between lockdown and when we started playing again. So I don't really think it's. I know Guendouzi did things that were wrong, but I think Arteta needs to look at himself too. Um, Cancun says, "Good afternoon, Jess. Good afternoon to you as well. I'm fine with him leaving, but my question is, how much value can we get out of selling players? I mean, I don't really know. I think it's not really about this group to me because I think we've done a lot of poor business over the last couple of years. So this group we're not going to get as much as we probably want to from the Bellerins and the Guendouzis and the Xhakas and these guys. I don't think we're going to get as much as we could if we were actually managing business correctly. But it's going to be that next group, this next group of, players from the academy and players that maybe we want to move on. How do we sustain and increase their value and get the most for them? And how do we move them on at the right time? It seems like a lot of other clubs know when's the right time to move on players, and we tend to wait until it's painfully obvious that we need to move them on, and by then it's too late. So it's about, like, if we have players coming in like Balogun and Aziz and maybe a couple others from the academy that trickle in, can we identify whether we want to go all in and make them first team players or sell them after a year or so or 2 years? Like, I want the evaluation stage to be a lot quicker. And I mean, we're going to be even looking at players like maybe even Pepe, depending on what kind of season he has next season. If he has a good one and he's still not a perfect fit, can we sell him quickly to a team in France? He had a decent end of the season with Arsenal this past season. So we're probably in a good position there. Does Arteta drop him back down to the bench and then he starts to agitate and then we try to sell him next summer? Or does Arteta try to sustain, make sure that he can use him, get goals out of Pepe, make him an important part of the team, and then his value goes up and then we sell him? These are important things. These are important things. So I'm looking to see if they can look at what they've done this with the group that they already have now, tearing up contracts, getting less than the values of certain players, and look at this next group of academy players that come in, fringe players that we may want to remove, and figure out, like, can we do it the right way? That's what I'm looking for. Anton says, I think you're being overly harsh on the club. As Stillman said himself, last summer, if Guendouzi was sold for 10 million, it was on Arteta, but he's had a bad loan and not pulled up trees and bids. I mean, I've said multiple times that Guendouzi added to his own demise as well, but it's still not something that we can overlook. It's a combination of Guendouzi, the club, all of it. So it's not really harsh. It's just the reality that we have an issue with value destruction and we've had it for the last couple of years. And it's just something that I personally can't overlook, but it's not to release any responsibility from Guendouzi. He definitely wasn't pulling up trees, but some of the value destruction had happened at Arsenal, which is basically what Tim is saying. His value has been low since he left, and it just never went back up when he went to Hertha Berlin. So it's not harsh. It's just the reality. And we'll know for sure if we have a true issue with value destruction, if Saliba and players like Martinelli are treated similarly and we have similar situations happening. Because those two players I'm looking at, like, they need playing time. They need to be integrated in a certain way. And depending on what happens, we could be looking at another in January, maybe Saliba wanting to leave, or at the end of the season, maybe Martinelli. So we just need to be smarter. It's not a foregone conclusion that we can't fix the situation, but if we don't acknowledge that there's a situation there, or we're not good at certain things, then we won't be able to fix it, if that makes sense. I'm not going to sit here and act like they didn't do anything wrong. Usopp says, question, should Guendouzi have apologized after the Brighton match? He was the only one defending his keeper. I mean, I don't really know. This whole thing, he never apologized. He never did this. He never did that. I mean, the way the media works is, Guendouzi's camp says something, the Arsenal camp say something, like by feeding, journalists and things like that. So I don't really know what happened there. I didn't really see the Guendouzi thing as a big deal. I mean, it's not like Granit Xhaka didn't jump up and strangle somebody on Burnley, but it was okay for him. It wasn't okay for Guendouzi or Pepe, but it was okay for him. So, I don't really know it was that. I just think that was a good opportunity to just kind of drop Guendouzi just out of the conversation altogether. And damage had already been done in Dubai when he had his, whatever he did there. That was it was just so swift how quickly he was moved out of the conversation and was just never brought back in. Um, Nocturnal Gunner says should have developed him more as well. Hopefully he gets more game time next season. Gunnar Glenn says he better play Saliba next season or questions will be asked. And that's what I'm saying. Like we've seen something like we've seen something that is alarming to us. Guendouzi worth 40 million at a certain point. Now we're selling him for 10 million. So there's a little bit of a red flag there. That's not to say that next season they can't fix things and make sure that these things don't happen again. But if we sit here and act like nothing happened and it was just Guendouzi and Guendouzi was just a bad player or a bad guy and Arteta and Edu and the club didn't do anything wrong, then we're setting ourselves up to do it again. There's nothing wrong with saying that you made a mistake. There's nothing wrong with changing your approach next time around, but it needs to be acknowledged that's not the way that you handle your assets. Anton says his value of 40 is purely hypothetical. You can say a player's worth whatever you want to your club. That's entirely different than being a $40 million buyer. I mean, his value is his value. Everybody knows that Guendouzi was 100% worth more 2 years ago than he is now. And whether that's 25 million, 30 million, or 35, that's way more and more significant to Arsenal, who's a self-sustaining model and needs this money, than 10 million, $2 million more than what you spent on Guendouzi. So whether it's 40 or whether it's 25 or 20, that's still, I mean, if your player goes down from 20 to 10, you should still be alarmed. Let's see. Cancun says, now that you said that, I think about the likes of Ryan Brewster, formerly of Liverpool. Liverpool is good at this. I mean, that's a player that they didn't really play a lot. That, it's just, if you don't think it's an issue and it was just Guendouzi, that's perfectly fine. Like, I can see how people would think that because the narrative around Guendouzi is he's this bad guy. But I personally think we could handle things better and make sure that we don't destroy the value. I mean, there's a reason why we don't ever really sell our players for good money. It's not just because the players are bad. A lot of teams sell bad players and make more than we do. So there's that. So the last thing I want to talk about we all kind of already know it, right? That Emile Smith Rowe is signing a new contract, right? So I love that for him. I love that for us. Emile Smith Rowe is ready to sign a new contract with Arsenal until 2026 after negotiations started in March, just waiting on last details to be completed. Then it'll be done. In the meantime, Willian is expected to leave Arsenal and blah, 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 things we already talked about. So what do you guys think about Emile Smith Rowe? Like, honestly, I think we should give him the number 10 or the number 8, whatever number he wants. What is his number now? It's not a good one, right? He needs a smaller number. But I love this kid. I think that he's the future, like for real. Like he's very, very good. And I think he's going to be important for us next season. I think he needs to play in the 10 role. That's really what I think. Like, I don't actually think we need to bring in Odegaard again. I think you just play with Emile Smith Rowe. Even Saka can play there, to be honest, and just bring in other players and just have a rotating group that can play behind the striker. But this guy is so good. And, I was saying this earlier that I know that at this point, it's not really like popular to give the club any praise or to say anything nice about the club because we finished 8th. But the way that we're handling the contracts and getting our young players signed up to new deals after a lot of this slipped through the cracks when Raul was in charge. For me, Eddie Nketiah, as well as Balogun, some of the details of where they're supposed to go, getting them on loans, making sure that they sign new deals, things like that, have slipped through the cracks, and we've been able to recover some of that. I mean, the Balogun deal is a huge, for me, a big deal. And then being able to integrate him into the team next season is important. Emile Smith Rowe, Saka, and Martinelli on our longer term contracts. And now we're looking at Akwanko, or I think his name is Akwanko, the goalkeeper, and Keto Taylor Hart. These are good improvements after years of just allowing high quality talent from our academy to just slip through our fingers. So this is a big deal. Like, I'm very, very happy about this. And I know we continuously are talking about incomings, but retaining our youth and being able to use them as either first team players or squad players or improve them enough to regain a fee is important for our club moving forward. So I'm excited about it. Like, I really, really am. And I hope that we give him a good number and he's happy. And, just, I can't wait to see what this player turns into. Like, I think he has like a very, very high ceiling. For real, for real. Matthew says the only thing about ESR is that he's very injury prone. We have to take that into consideration and make sure we take care of him. And that's why I just think it's important to make sure that we have enough players to play behind the striker, those three positions behind there. We have Martinelli, Saka, Pepe at the moment. I think we need to add in maybe another player or so just to make sure that they're not having too much pressure on them. This goes for Saka as well. But yeah, Emile Smith Rowe is very injury prone. Bowie the Cat says, I read reports that ESR would like to stay at Arsenal for life. What a gem. I mean, when we have players like this, we have to take care of them, right? I mean, it's not very often that you're going to find young players that want to stay at your club forever, and so we just have to raise our expectations to his. I'm sure he wants to play at the very highest level. He wants to make the English national team. So we have to make sure that we give him a platform to succeed. And I think, that's really up to the club to make sure that we match the ambitions of our best players. We haven't done that over the years, and that's why we lose our top young talent. We lose our best players because we are not ambitious enough. So hopefully they take that into consideration, because even just a team like Aston Villa looking at ESR and him being the second option after Emi Buendia to bring him in, that says a lot about the talent that we have. Even Bukayo Saka, we said this on one of the previous headline shows, is that Bukayo Saka is Borussia Dortmund's replacement for Jadon Sancho. That's a big deal. Competitive teams with ambitious owners and well-run clubs are looking at our young players now. So getting them signed up to new contracts is good, and that's the right thing to do. But we also have to match their ambition and make sure that we're creating a competitive and successful environment for them to thrive so we don't lose them, especially Emile Smith Rowe and Bukayo Saka. There's other players that I'm kind of like, okay, well, at some point they don't have the ties to the club, so they may want to go. But the Emile Smith Rowes and Sakas, we had players like that in the past that I think it keeps your foundation good when you have a really good combination of quality players from other leagues, and things like that, other countries. But then your youth and your academy players are mixed in with them. I think that's a good foundation to have. And our best teams have always had that combination. So I think we're building that for the future. At least it seems like that on the outside. Let's see. What is this? I don't know. You guys are talking about Grealish now. Joseph says Arteta always overplays Saka and ESR. Chelsea N1 Europe 1. Okay. Says, do you think Abramovich owned football $150 million for player? It's not fair. And I am a Chelsea fan. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess so. If you buy the best young talent and the best talent in the world and you keep doing it at a high volume, you'll win trophies, especially if you have a good coach. So that's the method of Abramovich. So yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's Arsenal stream, man. Do not waste the tweet says Arsenal have been good with the contracts for young players. and not so good with those of the players that they should be leaning on. Not so good with those of the players that they should be leaning on. So give me some examples, Gary. Richard says we need to keep the 10 as incentive for players like Grealish. ESR gets 8. What? What do you mean? So Grealish won't. Okay, so just I know we're saying Grealish wouldn't sign, but you think Grealish wouldn't sign because he couldn't get the number 10? That's crazy. I don't know if I believe all that. Yeah, but I'm gonna read some more of these comments, but I want to let you guys know what the question of the day is because I think you guys will need a little bit of time to think about it. So the question of the day is if you could ask one question to one past or present Arsenal player, who would you pick and what would be the question that you ask them? So, past or present players, if you could ask one of them one question, what would it be? We don't often get a chance to ask past or present players questions that we really want to ask them. So, who's the person and what question would you ask them, and a little bit of background of why you would ask that. So, an example of that would be I've always wanted to know why Laurent and Thierry Henry don't get along. So a question that I would ask is, Thierry Henry, why don't you and Laurent like each other? Because as good as that Invincibles team played together, they had issues off the pitch. And it's very well known that Laurent and Thierry Henry didn't get along. So I would love to know about that. I would also maybe ask Cesc Fabregas if he wished that he maybe didn't force the move from Arsenal, waited a couple years so he could have maybe been more successful at Barcelona later on in his career, because leaving when he did put him right in the midst of Xavi and Iniesta. And I don't think he got the return that he wanted. He was always kind of a fringe player there. So I've always wanted to ask him that, if he wished that he had stayed a little bit longer and maybe not forced the move the way he did, especially because he wanted to come back later on. So those are just examples. But if you could ask one past or present player from Arsenal a question, what would you ask them and why? Eddie Longbridge says, all we need to do now is give Tierney a new deal. Al Neni will get one, which is less exciting, but he's definitely staying. Yeah, Tierney, they're already kind of saying that they're working on it. And based on some of the things that he said, he it seems like he likes being here and he likes the coach and stuff. But again, Tierney is a top player. So you give him the deal, but you have to make sure that you're doing the other things to keep it competitive and keep them like, they have to know that we're doing the right things to get to the right places. You know what I mean? So ensuring that you get them a backup, making sure that you're consistently improving the team, that our objectives are being met. I think like even with Aubameyang, like you give him the big contract and then we have a decent summer, but not good enough really to be like pushing for anything, in my opinion. That takes the wind out of the sails of players, when they sign new deals and they're promised that we're going to try to get top 4, try to get top 6, trying to compete, So I don't want that to happen to Saka and Emile Smith Rowe and Tierney. Let's see. Okay, some of these questions are coming in now. Joseph says we need someone to partner party like Zachariah from Mönchengladbach. Zakaria's knee is about to fall off. Gunnar Glenn says Grealish is going to City after the Euros. Now they have Buendia. Usopp is saying his knee is not good. All right, so here are some of the questions. M. Hobbins says, Jack Wilshere, what do you think of Tottenham? I mean, that video of him, I think like what we had won an FA Cup, and he was on the top of the bus when we were doing the parade, and he had the speaker saying, what do you think of Tottenham? And he's such an Arsenal boy. Like, I love that kid so much. Dubber Ducky says, RVP, what really happened? I want to know, because there's a difference of like a lot of people think he left for money. He left because he wanted to win a trophy. And then RVP has said that he spoke to Arsene about bringing in certain players and we didn't bring them in. And he just didn't feel like we were ambitious enough and things like that. And then they talked about how he never got a new contract. Like they offered him one and he didn't sign it. And then he said that they never offered it to him. So there's a lot of difference of what happened between both parties. But I would like to know what RVP, like from his mouth, like behind closed doors kind of thing, like what actually happened between you and Arsene Wenger, and what were the conversations like about bringing in high quality players to compete? What did you and the other players talk about, like you and Cesc? And because Cesc even said in one of his interviews that, him and Robin Van Persie and like Nasri would talk about how the team just isn't good enough, like, and they felt like they were carrying the team. So I would like to know, like, have a conversation about that and what it was like being at Arsenal, a team that you had been out for a long time that kind of gave you your shot, and feeling like you need to move to do something else. And did we actually offer him a new deal, or did we not? Yo-Yo says, did you aim for Fergie? Says Fabregas. You guys are crazy. Cancun says, Jess just ruined my question. That's the one I was just thinking. Which one was it? Because I had two. Hold on. So many just came in. Sorry. Oh gosh, where'd they go? Arsene Wenger. Why didn't you just pay Suarez release clause straightforward without adding the pound to it? That is a good one. I know we said past players, but past managers as well. What were you thinking with the 40+1? I keep saying this. I feel like you buy Luis Suarez and you add him to the team with Alexis Sanchez, Ozil, Walcott, Wilshere, Ramsey, Santee, and you win the league. You win the league. Like, what were they thinking? And just the 40+1 is it's such an iconic blunder. I want to know what he was thinking behind that. It's like he was, that was just so rude, and just it backfired, I felt like. Let's see. Eddie says, I would ask Arteta, past player, what really went on with Guendouzi, also what hair product he uses. I mean, does anybody want to ask Arteta, like, just to be real for 5 seconds, like, you totally dye your hair? And also, how do you get it shellacked the way that you do? Because sometimes it looks like a helmet. Zick says, Sanogo, did you really play for Arsenal? He did, because I remember. I mean, I wonder if he remembers. I mean, I know he does. He follows it, but I mean, they were trying to say he was going to be the next Thierry Henry. He was going to be this and that, and he just was not. I mean, it didn't work out. And man, Sanogo is some of the memories, between Sanogo and Shamak, two of the most dead strikers we've ever had. Oh my goodness. Yo-Yo wants to ask, was it only for money for Ashley Cole? Cashley, was it only for the money? I mean, I think he would always probably try to say, I mean, we know that I crashed my car because they wanted to give me $5,000 less. But like, when I've done my research on this, I think the money had a lot to do with it. But it's also just the aspect of, like, you had a winning team that felt like things were changing, and they were right in the thick of Arsenal changing from a competitive club that wanted to win trophies to a commercial entity that was more about getting butts in seats and the Emirates and all that kind of stuff. And I think the players could feel that. And after, getting to the Champions League final and then not to re-up, and like, I don't think they felt like we were going to do what was necessary. And I watched a game from that, like 2004, when you could already tell that Chelsea was catching us. You could already tell. Like, it wasn't that hard to see that they were starting to spend money. And I feel like the players can feel that as well. Ashley, a big member of the English national team, going to English national team practices with John Terry and Frank Lampard, and they're probably talking about what their team is doing, and Arsenal just wasn't the same. So I think he'll always be able to say that Arsenal was just not being competitive, but money talks. It had to have been a combination, but I would like to ask him too, because Ashley Cole was my favorite player, like from that era, and then he left, and I never got attached to players after that again, because I never thought I'd recover. I just couldn't believe what was going on. But when you grow up and then you kind of see how things played out, could you actually blame him? Could you actually blame him for, football is a short, short career. So if you want to win and you want to get paid more, you're going to leave, so you have to be competitive, not only like on the pitch, but also be able to give people more money. And it's especially when start talking about like the Man Cities and the Chelseas, in order to compete with them, we're talking about spending more money on players, spending more money on wages, things like that. And we just weren't ready for that because we were turning into the commercial entity that we are now. It's crazy. Fidel says, I would like to ask Ozil why he locked Cola out of the car to fend for himself. I'll never forget that. Oh my goodness. So they came out with those like skinny knives. It was like very weird. And Kolasinac, like this bodyguard that he is, was really like trying to protect Ozil. And Ozil, yeah, he locked him out. That was crazy. Erwin says, Wenger, why we never won the EPL with the likes of Cesc, Nasri, Song, Sanya, RVP in the same team? Yeah, that's a good question to ask him. It just always kind of felt like we would start off good and then we'd go through a slump or something, and it would be nice to know from the perspective of somebody that was there and was watching the team be a good team, but not be able to get it over the line, why he felt like that was happening. Gunnar Glenn said he would ask Fabregas, who blocked your move to Arsenal after Barcelona? Did you want to come back or did Wenger block you? I mean, I feel like you have to ask almost like a neutral party for something like that, because I think Cesc will always say that he wanted to come back, but Arsene didn't want him back because he said that Arsene never answered the phone. When they were like when he was calling Arsene, he never answered the phone. He never responded to him wanting to come back. And Cesc almost had like a deadline. And then once the deadline passed, he decided to go to Chelsea to go play for Mourinho. But I think Arsene will always tell you that he didn't want to come back, or like I think at one point he said we didn't need that type of player, or that position was already filled. And I'm like, are you crazy? Like, you can always use a Cesc. You can always use a Cesc. So that's a very, very good question, because I don't know. It feels like Arsene didn't want him back and maybe he was hurt or something. Like Io says, Wenger blocked it. But I don't think, at that point, I know we had good midfielders, but could you really not do with a Cesc? Like at that point, you could have played Cesc even a little bit deeper. You could have put Ozil off wide. Like, I would have taken him back. Somebody has a little announcement. What is this? I'm trying to get back up to here. Breaking news. Apparently, second bid north of $2 billion is being readied, and they are not going anywhere and want to get the deal done. Club insiders have admitted that they are waiting for a second offer. You guys, that Daniel Ek thing with the Bergkamp, Vieira, Henry situation is something that I cannot get too invested in, because once I do and it doesn't go through, I will be crushed, because I just feel like without new owners, we're never going to get back to where we want to be. And we all know that the goal is to improve and to get to top 6, top 4, and start competing. But the Arsenal that I knew won stuff, like won the Premier League, was the best team in the Premier League, like would scare people in the tunnel. And we're not going to get there with this ownership. And I think we all know that in the back of our heads. So I don't really want to get too invested in it, because I don't want to be crushed if it doesn't happen. But that's very interesting news. And it's probably something that we'll talk about tomorrow at 6 p.m. UK time. Sophie, I think she's Gunnar Talk TV. But her name on Twitter is TV_Gunnar. She'll be on tomorrow, and Chris Davidson will be on as well. So we'll touch on that tomorrow at 6 p.m. UK time. So make sure you guys come back. Usab says, Adebayor, how did it feel when Wenger told you to get out? Oh my goodness. Am I the only one who thinks Adebayor was like really good? Like, I rated Adebayor highly. I thought he was such a good striker. But I think we got to a point where it was either RVP or Adebayor because we were moving into a one striker system, and he chose RVP, the hospital bed, the guy that was never available, and I just I didn't love it. It just I felt like Adebayor was maybe underappreciated, even though maybe his attitude wasn't the greatest, or maybe we didn't love his attitude, but I liked Adebayor. I rated him. Let's see. Question, how many Champions Leagues have you won? You must be a Chelsea fan. Um, let's see. Dublin Gooner says, Ozil, when did you lose your interest in playing football and why? Honestly, like you have to think about like the way that everything took place. And like, I don't know if Jason is still in the chat box, but he always talks about like the difference between M11 and M10. If you look at Mesut when he had 11 on his back versus 10 after he got the contract, he was such a different player, but it all coincides with when he left or was released, whatever it was, from the German national team. And maybe he just didn't feel like there was anything else to really play for because, you're at Arsenal. At that point, we're like third, fourth, fifth, and he's already won the World Cup. He's already won so many different things. And then now he's not playing for his national team. So maybe he just lost it after that. But it feels like it all kind of coincided with 2018 being off of the German national team, getting that second deal, and then feeling like Arsenal were not ready to compete. When you lose Alexis and you let Alexis go and you bring in Mkhitaryan, you bring in Aubameyang. Aubameyang's a great player and stuff like that, but I don't think he's ever had the electricity or anything as Alexis. We never really replaced Alexis. We never really replaced like for like, and it's almost like you strengthen one position and weaken another. Like you needed to bring in Aubameyang and then bring in another winger like Alexis, and we just didn't do that. And so I can't really blame Ozil if he's was disappointed in the fact that we didn't really feel like we were competing. That being said, like the level to which he just kind of fell off is just insane for a player of his quality. And it's just unfortunate. He's so young. I felt like he still had more years to go, but it just feels like 2018 was such a big year for him in terms of where his career was and how it ended up after that year. Bowie the Cat, Arsen about Lasagna Gate. I would love to ask him about that. I really, really would. You guys make sure you like the video and subscribe to the channel. You guys remember the question of the day is if you had one player, we're also doing managers as well. If you could ask one past or present manager or player from Arsenal Football Club one question, if you could ask them one question, what would it be? And if you could kind of say why, that would be great too. Yo, question. Why only check? Why only check? And then you get to January and bring in El Nene. That's so true. Don't you want to ask them some of these questions? Like, why? Like, why didn't you just go out and get the striker or go out and do the thing? Because we could have won the league. And like the amount of times that we got so close and didn't make it, I just think it was because we just didn't do enough. We just didn't do enough. You guys talking about Sinogo. My memories are just like going crazy, and they're not good memories, are they? What was the score in Baku? Yeah, you're a Chelsea fan. Around here, yeah, your banter may be funny, like for you, but like nobody really cares. Sorry. Yeah, and it's just funny. I hate to say it, but the reason why Chelsea will always be a smaller club than Arsenal is because they're so obsessed with Arsenal. It's ridiculous. Focus on yourself. Why are you focusing on us? The fact that you guys are always in our chat, the fact that you guys are always on Twitter talking about us just keeps us big because you keep circulating our name around. So if you want to be bigger, just be the bigger person and walk away and stop talking smack, because small people talk crap about other people. We don't talk about you. You talk about us. That's why we'll always be bigger than you regardless. And we still have more trophies than you. So there's that as well. Oh yeah, and what was the score of the FA Cup the last time that we were in the final against each other? You can tell us the score of that as well. M. Hobbin says, "What is it like being so pretty?" Oh, from Giroud. I thought you were talking about me for a second. I was like, "Oh, that's so nice." Giroud, man, that's a good-looking guy. But for me, it's a little much because you can tell that he probably sits in the mirror for a long period of time. There was like a point in time where Arsenal, I think it was, remember the gold jerseys with the blue sleeves from Puma, and they were like unbearably tight, like the team was going overboard to look a certain way. Like you could just tell, like tans, getting male grooming, beautiful hair. Yeah. And Giroud was like the prince of that. Yeah, for sure. He's a very good looking guy, but it's almost like to another level. Let's see. Let's see. Matthew says, yes, players can tell because ambition starts from the very top. Exactly. I don't, when we talk about, we had like the best team that I've ever seen from Arsenal, like that team, that group, you know, if you think about I mean, they're the best, some of the best players in the world, Thierry Henry, Vieira, Sol Campbell. They're not going to sit around and just be okay with the team deteriorating the way it is, you know, or with lack of ambition because they want to continue to win. So in order to keep them engaged and keep them at your team, like at your club, you have to show competitiveness. And they probably could just sense that if you ask them, could you sense that the club was going through a change and not a good one? They probably would say yes. You know, it's just, I can't imagine. I can't imagine. Eddie Longbridge says, what toothpaste brand do you use, Gabrielle, to make your team so perfect and white? Make your teeth so perfect and white. I mean, his teeth are so white and like really glowy. So I would want to ask that as well. But I think it's probably the teeth. No, let me stop. Let me stop. Um, Yo-Yo says, why didn't you sign Javi Alonso, Marcus Sina, David Villa, etc. to Wenger? I'll never forget that because didn't Seth say that he was like, he had done all the negotiating already. He had already convinced Javi to come to Arsenal and then we didn't bring him in. I mean, that's just poor. Javi Alonso was like class and we didn't bring him in. There was a lot of opportunities for us to bring in really good players and, you know, we just didn't do it. Fab's latest is PSG are negotiating with Inter for Ashraf Hakimi. I think we kind of already got whiffs of that before. That's a really good move for them. I don't really know how Genie fits into that midfield. You know, it's a little strange, but I think based on rumors, Verratti will move out and go to maybe a Chelsea. Genie is there. They're not going to keep Danilo. So they have some restructuring to do. But at Hakimi to PSG is a very good pickup for them. Christian says it's because we're good going forward and we have had a shit defense. Yeah. Eddie says, like to ask Christopher Ray what his favorite breakfast cereal is. EG says, one question, why did you not get Luis Suarez? I mean, I want to know that as well. You get Luis Suarez, you win the league. Probably a couple times. Yo-Yo says, question, do you take responsibility for the loss? Layman. Oh my goodness. Oh my goodness, you guys. I think based on these questions, they'd probably be happy not to be in a room with you guys being interrogated because they would have to like really answer. So crazy. Dario says, Gabrielle's teeth are made of plastic. Oh, God. Matthew says, the club has to show ambition or get a sugar daddy like Chelsea who can buy us some wins. Exactly. We need a sugar daddy quick. AK says, question to Wenger, why did we sign no outfield players in 15-16 summer window? That season, Leicester won the league. Do you have regret? Yeah, for sure. I think that one's really fresh. That's the most recent time I can think of that we were actually really competitive and we looked like we could have won the league. So it's definitely something that I think about a lot. Like, why didn't we just do the right thing? Six says, Alexis, would you go to Manchester United again? I mean, I'm sure that was a nightmare. Why are there so many Chelsea fans in here? I'm questioning this. What's happening? Did you guys not get the memo? This is not a Chelsea stream. What the heck? There's so many of you guys in here. It's so crazy. Where are you? Jem, you know you're my guy, but not today. Not today, buddy. This Arsenal stream. Dublin Gooner says, Michael Thomas, can I buy you 89 drinks? Okay, you guys are crazy. All right, so 1 minute or 1 hour and 10 minutes. I think that's good for the stream. We did good, you guys. The questions were amazing. Thank you so much for participating. And yeah, so I'll be back at 6 p.m. UK time tomorrow. We'll be talking again to Sophie. She has her own YouTube channel, and I think her name on Twitter is TV_Gooner. So she'll be on here as well as Chris Davidson. And we'll be talking Arsenal news and maybe the Ek news. I have to look at it and see if I even want to entertain that. You guys, I'm so just not thinking that the Gronkies are going to sell. But yeah, we may talk about it. But make sure you guys like the video and subscribe to the channel. I'll see you guys tomorrow. Chelsea fans, go find something else to do. Go worry about yourselves. And I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. Bye, guys.